intelligencesquared.com.
All right, well, last but by no means least, our second speaker against the motion is Mani-Shankar-Aiyar, because how could you possibly have this debate without an Indian politician taking part? Former Indian diplomat, minister, and member of the Indian National Congress, as well as a very distinguished political columnist. Mani, your chance to speak.
Thank you very much. Mr. French is, of course, not French, and even so, his argument is not sincere. For he arrives here and tells us that the Indian democracy is a fatal weakness of the structure of that state. He tells us that it is a non-functional state. Or might I remind him that at page 105 of his latest book, India, he describes Indian democracy as, quote, a self-balancing ecosystem. If I go back one book,
and at the moment it's
he wrote a book called Tibet, in which he says, Tibet is ruled not by terror, but by the absence of freedom. The one thing that you don't lack in India is freedom. Then his first book, he says he's inspired, in fact, I think he's named because of that after Patrick Henry. He's inspired by the slogan, give me liberty or give me death. And then he fetches up before you and says he'd rather have death than to have liberty. I think we should put this kind of hypocrisy in its proper perspective. And to do so, I will draw from my own life. When I was in the Indian Foreign Service, I served for 1 year under the dictatorship of Ho Chi Minh. I then had 2 years under the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein. And finally, I had 3 years under the dictatorship of Zia-ul Haq. It's made me a Democrat for life. We are given to understand that human development in India has not improved. That was Suhail's point. Of course it hasn't improved because we don't have enough democracy, not because we have too much democracy. We have taken democracy in India out from simply parliament and the state assemblies and taken it right down to the grassroots, where in India today we have 300,000 institutions of local self-government, to which we have elected 3.2 million representatives, of whom 1.8 million are women, 86,000 of whom hold office in these local bodies. This is empowerment participation on a scale that is without precedent in history and without parallel in the world. And yet, Suhail and Patrick can only look at the pulchritude that we get in our headlines, which tell us that there's nothing but corruption in our democracy. I think what we need to understand is that democracy is only a necessary condition of good governance. It is not a sufficient condition. But if you don't have democracy, you can't have good governance. For all examples we have of non-democratic countries are countries in which corruption, as in a democracy, is often much larger. Nepotism, as in a democracy, is much more acute. And undesirables being in power. I can't think of anybody more undesirable than Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin. It's added to oppression, to discrimination, and inescapability. Why, even in the houses in Westminster, we have the interesting spectacle of democracy being turned into murdocracy. So I don't think there's any democracy that's not flawed, but every dictatorship is flawed. And therefore, instead of twisting the subject before us, which is whether democracy is our Achilles heel, into saying that our democracy is flawed, I know of no democracy that's not flawed. But I also know of no alternative system that is not even more flawed. So the point is the one that is before us. Is democracy crippling us, or is democracy enabling us to survive? Let me begin and look at this in the perspective of a politician, one who has to stand for elections. It's the most risk-prone job that we have in India. There's a word which exists in the English language, but which is rarely to be seen in the Times of London, and is to be seen all the time in the Indian newspapers. It's anti-incumbency. The punishment that is accorded to politicians is for 2/3 of all MPs to be defeated at the subsequent election. There is no doubt at all that punishment is meted out by the people to its rulers in our country. And that therefore, if you are not very, very careful, the chances are that if you dissatisfy those who've elected you, they're going to have the great joy of kicking you out once again. And it is this that keeps what Patrick in his wiser moments described as the self-balancing ecosystem of our society. He has put all his emphasis, on criminalization in Indian politics. But where did he meet the criminal? By his own confession, in jail. If criminals are not being chased into jail, how did he meet Mukhtar Ansari in jail? And yes, there are these people who got charges against them. Many of them are very controversial persons against whom their opponents seek to file false cases. We have many, many people in our politics who are charged with crime from of a very minor nature to a very, very, very serious nature. And yet, does their being in Parliament or does their being in the Assembly stop them from being taken into courts? Stop them from being put into jail? As of this minute, we've got half a dozen of the most prominent politicians in India, people on whom the government depends, who are sitting in the Tihar jail, charged with serious crimes. And they're not able to come out because our courts, in this self-balancing ecosystem, ensures that even if the people have made the mistake of electing a wrong man to Parliament, the courts are there to ensure that he should go where he deserves to go, which is the jail. I think we ought to also recognize that...
He's a parliamentarian from India. They
Okay, Mani.
I think we also need to recognize that it is only in a democracy that politicians are denigrated. It's only in dictatorships that you have the kind of adulation that people like Hitler and Stalin received. So I'm delighted that Suhail Seth is able to get up and make abusive remarks about me in London, because he'll survive when he gets back to Delhi. Had he been a Chinese, then we would have loved to see him swinging slowly, slowly in the wind.
Suhail and Patrick, your chance to come back.
You know, money always reminds you of college day debating standards. Lace your speech with humor, forget the facts. 2 quick questions, Mani. Hand on your heart. I don't know when you last put it there. Do you genuinely believe Indira Gandhi's return to power and Narendra Modi's constant electoral victories, are they not, in your mind, a mockery of a form of democracy, especially to the people who've died? 1984, we had the Sikh riots. We then had the program in Gujarat.
And your
Quick
second
comments.
question?
I'm going to put my hand exactly in the place where Suhail Seth puts his purse, on my heart, and answer that Mrs. Gandhi's comeback in 1980 was a telling vindication of our democracy, for when the people disliked her, they not only defeated her party, they defeated her son, they defeated her, and she was rendered absolutely in the Siberia of Indian democracy. And then when they saw the alternative, and the circus that was going on in the country, they said, we'd like to have you back. Now, I can't think of a more democratic system than one which punishes you for the mistakes you've made and then forgives you because you're going to make a better prime minister.
Okay,
As for Narendra Modi, may I assure Suhail Seth that if he and his boss Ratan Tata stop supporting Narendra Modi, we'll defeat him in the next election, and that's coming in a few months.
No, one. This is again typical Mani. One of his colleagues looks at Facebook pages to determine facts. This man quotes out of context. Every party and every industrialist has commented on Narendra Modi's form of transformational governance qua industry. I'm making a larger point, Mani, on which I want your response. Do you believe it is essential to welcome murderers as form of democrats only because you have jails to send them to? Would you much rather not have a system where they don't come into politics in the first place?
I don't
meant.
think the Indian capitalists whom you serve should be praising these murderers. I have for the last 10 years been condemning this murderer, saying that no one should vote for him. But he is getting the support of a class which you referred to, which is attempting to capture our democracy. They may win once, they may win twice, but we, the people of India, will defeat them the third time.
Okay.
He's already won thrice.
Okay.
Patrick.
Yeah, I've just got a couple of quick points. One is that you talk about Panchayati Raj, the idea of local self-government, something that you personally strongly believe in, I know, from your time when you were the relevant minister. But isn't the reality that actually that form of local self-government has very often not worked? In the largest state in India, UP, at the moment, you need to pay about 5 million rupees in order to become a block president. There are numerous examples in Lucknow of prostitutes and liquor being supplied to candidates by other parties. There are numerous cases in Ghaziabad of people being kidnapped. And in the words of Omer Anas's recent report, local elections in UP are hijacked by mafia because nothing is bigger than caste and cash. In other words, democracy at that local level is not functioning. And my second point I'd just like you to quickly answer is that you gave an interview to Reuters today when you said that the minute the Gandhi family is no longer in Congress, the party will begin to fall apart. Wouldn't it be easier to just change the Republic of India to the Monarchy of India? You can have Queen Sonia, you can have a Crown Prince. That would solve your problems. You wouldn't have to worry about elections.
My answer to your first question is, instead of picking the worst example, is the one state where you don't have Panchayat Raj at all, you have Sarpanch Raj, I would suggest that you go to Kerala. I would suggest you visit Karnataka. I would suggest you go to Maharashtra. I would suggest you go to West Bengal. I'd suggest you go to Sikkim. I suggest you go to Tripura and see whether the peculiar syndrome of non-Panchayati Raj being run by criminals is replicated in states that have sincere Panchayati Raj. As for this charge of dynastic rule, I find is one that is difficult to sustain. Why are none of Mahatma Gandhi's children or grandchildren in politics? Why is it that every time they stand, they get defeated? Why are Vallabhbhai Patel's children or grandchildren?
You think they haven't tried to get tickets?
Why are they not defeated? In the case of the Gandhi family, they may get appointed by us because we'd like to have them, and that's our democratic right. But then they have to first get themselves validated within the party.
No,
then they have to get them. No, then they have to.
Do you think it's acceptable that 9 out of 10 of your younger MPs are hereditary?
We'll first finish with the Gandhis and then come to the others.
You can never finish with the Gandhis. You can't finish with the Gandhis.
We'll first finish with the Gandhis in this discussion. We will, in the case of the Gandhis, apart from Jawaharlal Nehru, there is no one who has not been defeated at the polls. Insofar as Nehru was concerned, he was defeated within the party and then he had to come back. If in a democratic system, you say that Randolph Churchill's son, Winston Churchill, can be the prime minister here, if you can have a series of 3 Chamberlains, Joseph, Austin, and Neville, and if the Duke of Devonshire can convert the houses of Westminster into a kind of Hindu undivided family, then I just don't see why being born in a particular womb should disqualify you from being in politics.
But nobody's suggesting that you can't have one or two hereditary politicians.
And while you have taken great pains to find out the number of children who've succeeded, you haven't taken any trouble at all to inform them of the number of children who failed. There are many, many sons and daughters of politicians who get defeated at the polls. There are some who win. And the fact is that only 30 of those who are in the Lok Sabha have come in because of their parents. The remaining 512 have come in of their own accord. I don't know what is the point you're attempting to make.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, your statistics are wrong.